In this video, Brady's going to help me demonstrate how to make bookcases and other fitted furniture cabinetry like this with only the most basic tools and with the use of the Freebird 3D assembly square. You don't need a Domino jointer, you don't need a Lamello Zeta. All you need is a drill driver with some appropriate screws and a means of squaring the parts as you offer them up. So Brady's got all his parts cut out and labelled. We have a standard labelling system where the back panel is BP, the sides are L for left and R for right, and the shelves are S1 running from the bottom to the top, S1, S2, S3 in this case, and then these have a top as well. Any side which will not end up being painted or seen, we'll just put a mark in a nice big oval, and we'll put before the code, before the dash, we'll put the unit name. So A is the leftmost unit and B is the rightmost unit. I've just done a little sketch to plan this. Both of them have the same shelf heights, but unit B is the narrower one. So this is all the information that we need to do our assembly. We'll be using this squaring jig. This is the new version of our own design. Check in the description below for availability to buy this. This allows us to very rapidly clamp parts in place with a 3D squaring system. So it will be aligned in all three dimensions, and the way that these clamps slot into it allows it to be quickly moved to the next position. The first thing that Brady's going to do is screw his left side of his first unit down onto the back panel. Now notice we haven't had to mark out the shelf heights yet, that'll be the next stage. Now the important thing at this stage is to make sure that your bottom edge is perfectly flush to the bottom of the back panel. We're making an open bottom bookcase unit here, so this is the sort of bookcase that would sit on top of a base unit on a countertop. Now the reason for starting with that is that you now get a rigid upright side to reference all your other sides to and to do your height marking. Wherever possible, you want to make each process quick, so marking all four sides for this project in one batch is the most efficient way. So Brady's checked the alignment of the bottoms of the unit just by nudging them up to flush. He's now clamping them in place so they stay like that, and then from the bottom he's going to mark his shelf heights. When planning the unit, you should be figuring out the heights from the bottom of the unit to the tops of the shelves. The reason we work to the top of the shelf is that this method will work for a lipped shelf as well as any other thickness of shelf. And this is something we quite often use if we're hiding a light profile or if we just want a visually thicker shelf in a bookcase. Once you've used the tape measure, just to hook over the bottom and mark up to the heights, you can use a square to mark across every edge. So Brady's now set aside the sides which will be used later, and he's going to go right ahead and position and fix the bottom shelf. So he's placing the 3D assembly jig into position. He screws it first to the side after referencing this little nib, this flat surface here, onto the top line of his shelf. Well, this shows the limitation of the ratchet clamp. It's generally a better all-purpose system to use a screw clamp. This is the Makita version, and on the side there is the Festool version. Now note that the standard method for us at Freebird is to set our shelves back a little bit from the sides, usually 3mm. That makes a better visual appearance, in our opinion, when you have an Aris roundover on the edge. Now Brady's using the square just to square down for the center position of his board. Now this board is 18mm with a lipping applied. This rightmost edge of the flat part here, this one, gives you your reference for your center. So that's 9mm away from your flat reference here. And note that the hole cut out here gives you a clear visual that the top of your shelf has lined up with the mark. The screws that we're going to use for this first shelf are the Spax-M. This is a specialised screw with a spear point which reams out the MDF edge grain and ensures that it won't split. The screws that he used for fixing the side to the back panel were 32mm coarse thread kreg screws. Now with these Spax screws you can drive them straight in, but you'll find you're hanging around for a while it reams its way through the surface of the MDF, so it often works out quicker to pre-drill. To save time, you can just pre-drill a few millimeters into the surface, which is just enough to ensure the screw grabs a bit more quickly, and you can then trust it to cut into the edge of the board without splitting. So he's positioning it in just the same way, getting the flat part of this corner guide onto his line, which represents the top of the shelf. He's clamped it first onto the side, just making sure that the overhanging lip of the jig is sitting tight on both sides onto the front. Once it's in that position, you know then that when your shelf is sitting tight to your back panel and tight to the face of the jig, everything is three-dimensionally square. Again, referencing down for his center line, but in this instance, this is a 22mm shelf. Most of our projects we use 22mm for shelves. When we lip them, we use 18. 22 just gives more resistance to bending over longer spans. And what Brady's done in that case is he's just referenced off this, which would be a 9mm center point from the top of the shelf, and he's just brought it down a couple of millimeters by eye. The depth of this shelf unit is 25 centimeters internally, plus the 18mm back panel. The majority of the shelf units we make are that depth. We find that works for most uses. Now he's positioned the screws just by eye from front and back. We usually aim for about an inch and a half, say 36mm, thereabouts. Look at that, Brady. That's experience. We find that's about optimum for strength and avoiding all risk of splitting near the front edge of the shelf. You could choose to put 3 screws in. I would say 2 is generally sufficient. Same process again. And now what he can do for the top shelf is just spin the jig round and make sure that it's going to reference the shelf flush to the top edge. This overhanging lip on the jig is 18mm, so that's just optimum for a carcass, which is all 18. And that ensures then that in this scenario you can clamp it first to your top and then just nudge it up to flush with the top of your side there. Depending how confident you feel with this sort of thing, you can just eye that in to the midpoint of the thickness of the top there. For the outer carcass, our standard is to make the sides and the top, and if there is a bottom, to make them all flush to each other. We just find that works better for the overall assembly, but then the shelf edges will be set back 3mm. Because the shelves have all been assembled onto the left-hand side before applying the right-hand side, they act as a stop. They act as a stop for the kreg screws. Now note that again, as he put that side on, he was taking great care to get it flush to the bottom. That's what's most important with a unit like this, which will sit on a countertop. If these two parts aren't flush, they'll show a slight gap when they sit on the base unit. So having done that, he screwed it all in, and now he can start screwing the shelves to the side. Now for the rest of this first unit, I want to show you the other option, or one other option of screwing. That's to use a self-cutting, more standard screw, not a specialised MDF screw, but one that has a very sharp point. This one is the KTX brand. Another similar one would be Ricer Cutter. The benefit of this is that the sharp tip will self-cut very quickly and avoids the need for pre-drilling. Now we find that they do a good job, but you can't guarantee they won't split. So here's a sample shelf edge where those have just been driven in, and note that there is a little bit of splitting. So this depends on your preference. For a quick shelf unit, that may not really cause you any issues if you're not putting them too near the edge, but you may prefer to be absolutely sure there's no splitting within the body of the board. If you're making a unit like this out of birch ply, then from experience that is less prone to splitting with that type of screw. So it does depend on the choice of material. It's just a minor time saving to go right ahead and drive those in. Yeah, as Brady's saying, the other benefit of that is the head of that screw doesn't raise the MDF so much, so you're left with a very flat, flush surface. Something we didn't mention before is Brady started fixing this to the back panel just with one or two screws near to the left side, but before fully fixing them here, he's made the top flush to the side, knowing that the side is flush to the bottom. And that just avoids these fixings here drifting the top away from square. What he's doing now is using the kreg multi-mark to set the center position of that lip. We definitely wouldn't recommend just driving a self-cutting screw straight in, so he is going to pre-drill that. So that's the first shelf unit done, very precisely aligned. Parts are flush where they need to be flush. Parts are exactly on the marking lines. And this is important because when you have a run of units side by side, you want to be sure that those shelves are going to be dead straight running down the full finished piece. For the second unit, we're going to show you an alternative screwing system using the Conformat screws. So this is a screw type that you can get from Hayfully and many other resellers. It's a Conformat size 2. It does require a specialised stepped drill bit, which is quite expensive. There are cheaper versions, including a Trend Snappy one, but they're not as good. They break more easily. So if you go for this, I do recommend getting the original bit. And these are the screws that we most often use because they work a little bit like a dowel. They've got a good pulling force, but they also have the bulk to give a little bit more strength. And they will come apart and reassemble a lot better than the other screws we've shown you. Good practice when you're assembling is to mark the top of the shelf. This is particularly important when you're going to disassemble and when someone else might reassemble it, so that they can put the shelves the right way up, because otherwise the pre-drilled holes won't align. So yeah, this unit was started just before 9 o'clock. It's 9:15 now, so 15 minutes or slightly more and that unit's completely assembled. So we've got the Festool Domino, we've got the Marvell Duo doweller and the Zeta P2 system. But we continue to use this very simple direct screw method, which has no downside in accuracy or speed. I know now that they can have a sketch like this. Brady or Matt can just see that, know exactly what to do and make something as accurate and well aligned as what you see here.